Hey everyone, Alex here. Hopefully by now you've seen the first episodes of Letters From Vega. It was probably by far the most ambitious project I've ever attempted, and maybe one of the craziest projects in Star Citizen. The total development time was about 6 months, which is insane. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys an in-depth look into what went into making Letters From Vega, or the first part of it anyway, because there's so many pieces to it that haven't really been attempted before in Star Citizen, which I think would be really cool to share. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to give you all a brief overview of all the phases that went into making Letters From Vega Part 1, and then what I'll do, all the nitty gritty details, I'll put them in dedicated videos later on. Jumping right in then, with any project you normally can't just dive in without some idea of what you're doing, and to be honest, who knows what can happen. In summary, the process from start to finish can go something like this. There's 5 main phases that I have in my head, shall we say. It begins with the initial concept, which is like, that's the idea, and then you kind of just putting down notes for the baseline of the idea. And then you got pre-production, which is your blocking and your script writing and getting all your cast together. And so the blocking is creating the white boxes of the sets and blocking out the rough timing of the project. And the script writing phase comes slightly before that. So it goes script writing and blocking. And in the script writing phase, that's pretty much when you're creating the script and you're iterating on it. Originally, Letters From Vega had 4 episodes, but we decided to condense it down to 3 because it's going to be an episodic format where it's going to be released in 3 parts. We really wanted to have it work a little bit better in that, so some things were cut and some things were shuffled around a little bit, so we could make it a little bit more streamlined and better to watch. The next part is the actual production phase. So this is when we take the white box cinematic sequences, and based on what the camera sees, we'll build all the sets around that. And then in there as well, you've got the animation phase. So in our case, it used a lot of we had a lot of facial capture and full body motion capture, and then we got the voice actor recording as well. This phase took place between I'd go from mid-August up until early December was pretty much this phase, and then after that, between December and January, those were all little tweaks and modifications that could be done while the project was in post-production, which leads me into post-production. So in post-production, the main thing in post here was the audio work, and that was done by Hybrid V, who has worked on other projects such as Combined Arms, and the music was done by Alexander Jordan, who also has worked on Combined Arms, and the 3 of us have worked together in the past on various Bulkhead shows as well, which is pretty cool. And then any additional visual elements are along the lines of at the start of every scene, there's a camera like UI that pops up and then it fades away. So it's things like that. It's small little things that are added in post. And then the last phase is the most recent phase, which at the time of recording I haven't done yet, which is the release on social media. So the release will obviously be the video release, but there's also the production of the trailer, in which we announce the release date and what the project is about, because up until that point I haven't told anyone outside the project, apart from some select people, what the project is about and what it is and what's in it. Yeah, so the social media is just the likes of Twitter, Citizen Spotlight, Spectrum, Reddit and all that. And I post certain amounts to I post more to certain places and less to other places. So say I'll put loads of stuff on Twitter, but I won't put much on Reddit because I don't want to spam it and annoy people. Those are pretty much the 5 main phases of the production as I see it and how I saw it during Vega. Each phase did take quite a long time, and the initial concept began as far back as April last year, because I literally I was trying to sleep and then I couldn't sleep, and I thought this would be a cool idea, and I had an exam the next morning, so I just PM'd Sean and I was like, hey, I've got this idea, and he was like, say no more. Wrote a script overnight. It was a bit insane. Okay, so so with the that'll give you an idea on how long the production it actually took from start to finish. It's a bit insane. So with that, well, the phase is lined out, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on the main tools that I used. So what I've got open here, this is a mock-up of the production pipeline for Letters From Vega. and it's a little bit mental. It's like a big web of stuff. But these are the tools that I use, not necessarily what Hybrid or Xander used, but these are the ones that I was directly involved in, and how kind of everything fit together. So the way it's set out, you can see that I've got CryEngine pretty much in the middle, because everything fed into there, because CryEngine was the primary. Like, normally you'd use it as a game engine, but I was using it as a render engine, which basically took a bunch of the tools that game developers use to produce cinematics, and I kind of just used that part of it to produce the video. And you can see all the different pieces going in there as well. So the project, like I said, the project was built and rendered in CryEngine using some slightly outdated assets ported from an older build of Star Citizen into the engine, but it was, like I said, it was far from the only tool that was used. So Letters From Vega has quite a number of custom built assets which are rendered in engine, and these include the assets for the characters Dalen and the heads for Crandall and Ewing, along with all the facial animations they use and the textures they use. So Dalen, Crandall and Ewing, they were all produced in a tool called DAZ 3D by Sean, or Slayer TNT, and then all the animations were produced on them using a combination of Maya, Motion Builder and Phase Shift. So Motion Builder, for anyone that doesn't know, is, as far as I'm aware, the industry standard for motion capture processing. What I used Motion Builder for was processing my own mocap, which was done using a tool called iPine Mocap Studio, and this is pretty cool. I'll mind and flash up a video on screen that I recorded on my phone a while back when I started doing that. It uses 2 Kinect sensors, and each of those is hooked up to its own PC, and they're kind of linked together, and I have like my main PC there as like the processing PC, which is pretty cool. And all that information is fed into Motion Builder, and then I can retarget that onto one of the character rigs. So in the case of Dalen, it's her own rig, because she's got her own system. And in the case of Ewing and Crandall and the like, they all use the CIG male skeleton. So that's the same system that drives the animations that you see in game now, which under the hood it's the male V7 skeleton, which is pretty cool. And the facial animation, that was a little bit insane. So each head had to have its own blend chips created. So I tried to initially use driven keys, and that didn't work too much. So I decided to replace Dalen's one with blend shapes, which is kind of the more traditional way of doing it. But the rest use drive keys. So they just drive the fit. So the drive keys, what they'll do is there's lots of little facial joints on the head. You might have seen them in some various behind the scenes things for Star Citizen, where there's loads of joints around the face. It uses those and kind of drives the position and rotation of them to create facial expressions. That's the way it's set up. And then I've got some other tools where After Effects, which we use for flash elements, and Audacity for voice recording. As you can see, everything feeds into CryEngine, but that's not the end of the pipeline. So from CryEngine, once these sequences are rendered, they are put into what I call the edit. So the edit is essentially the final video. Everything feeds into it, and it's refined or changed based upon how the final production looks, and this happens all the way from pre-production with previous footage, sketches, and the like, all the way up to the final video. So before the cast was even fully assembled, what we also did was a read through the master script, which was used for the initial timing of the track view sequences, with the track view being the main cinematic editor for CryEngine. Later on during the production, the edit can be used to determine which set pieces are required and which animations are required, and those are kind of used to determine what I do and what I don't have to do. So this was used for the set design, the facial capture, and the full body motion capture. So you see, most of the time when a camera's looking away from a character, usually I use that to switch the animation so it looks a little bit better. So with all that, rendering out the track view sequences in various phases, I think the most drafts I had on one scene was 12 drafts, and incorporating them into the edit helps determine what is required and what isn't, and just makes working a little bit more efficient. And then once a recording of all the core cast, so that's Jedi, who's Dalen, Tacti, who's Ewing, Sam, who's Eddie, and George, who's Crandall, once they were all recorded, they were assembled in the edit and ready. And I would use the timing of their voices to drive the facial animations in engine. So there was a bit of feedback going around, as well as feedback from the team as well. Once the recording for the core cast was finished and cut, the edit was also used to effectively time and create the facial animations so that everything matched up. And in later stages of production, this can be used to easily find and fix render errors or rough edges in the animations and lighting. And my god, there were absolutely loads of them. So once the drafts were ready and the timing was finalized, the audio work could begin, and this was then handed off to Hybrid for audio mixing and Xander for the soundtrack that you hear in the prologue sequence and the opening titles. And the way that was set out was there's like 5 blocks of scenes, so scene 1, or 4 blocks of scenes should I say. There's scene 1 and 2, which is the opening credits and the constellation. There's scene 3, which is the airfield when they're outside. Scene 4, which is the interview in the CIC. And scene 5, which is when they're outside again at the end of the video. So those are kind of put up into 5 different blocks, so it's easier for Hybrid to work with when doing the audio. But yeah, so that's pretty much an overview of how Letters from Vega was made. Over the next few weeks, I've gone into quite a bit of detail showing how the battle for Vega was brought to life. Or the first stage of it anyway, because this is only part 1, so stay tuned.